Today, you look at a world map and see clear, crisp lines separating the blue from the green. You see 7 distinct color-coded blocks of land. It looks like basic science. Most of us picture continents as massive, separate islands of rock, permanently divided by wide oceans. You were taught this is just a fundamental fact of nature. Geologically, the dirt beneath your feet is very real. The tectonic plates shifting underground are real. The coastlines are real. But the borders we draw between these massive landmasses are entirely made up. The human brain hates chaos. When we look at something too massive to comprehend, we immediately try to chop it into smaller, digestible pieces. Today, we are going to break down exactly how humans invented continents to make sense of a massive world. We will look at how ancient Greeks, a Russian Tsar, and confused map makers took a perfectly connected planet and sliced it into the chunks you memorized in school. We are going to trace this massive geographical story all the way back to its origin. You will see how human ego and political branding forced the Earth into a shape that actually defies geology. For thousands of years, humans have been drawing arbitrary lines in the dirt and calling it science. But to really understand how we started dividing the world, we have to look at the most confusing border on Earth. It sits right in the middle of your map, and it proves that the very concept of a continent is just a cultural illusion. Geologically speaking, Europe is not a separate continent. It is just the bumpy western peninsula of a massive continuous landmass called Eurasia. If you were to drain the oceans tomorrow, you would not see a boundary. You would just see one continuous expanse of rock stretching from the coast of Portugal all the way to the beaches of Japan. If you look at the tectonic plates beneath our feet, Europe and Asia share the exact same slab of rock. There is no ocean dividing them. There is no giant physical fracture in the Earth. In fact, India sits on its own distinct tectonic plate that violently crashed into Asia millions of years ago to create the Himalayas. From a purely scientific standpoint, India actually has a much stronger claim to being a continent than Europe does. So why do we draw a line on the map? The official boundary between Europe and Asia is a Russian mountain range called the Urals. But mountains do not separate continents anywhere else on Earth. The Rocky Mountains do not split North America in half. The Andes do not divide South America into two different worlds. Tourists literally go to the Ural Mountains to stand with one foot in Europe and one foot in Asia. But the dirt is exactly the same. The trees are the same. The weather is the same. That boundary in Russia was not drawn by geology. It was drawn in 1725 by a Swedish mapmaker named Philip Johann von Strahlenberg. Before him, people used a random river as the border. But the Russian Tsar, Peter the Great, desperately wanted his expanding empire to be seen as a modern Western power. He wanted Russia to belong to Europe. So Strahlenberg dragged a line right down the Ural Mountains to give the Tsar exactly what he wanted. The concept of Europe is not a physical fact. It is an exclusive club created by human borders and political branding. So if Europe is not a geological continent, who started this whole obsession with dividing the land in the first place? The ancient Greeks actually invented the word continent, and they did not do it for science. They did it to draw a clear line between themselves and everyone else. Around 500 BC, early Greek thinkers looked at their world and pictured it as a flat shield surrounded by a giant mythical ocean. They decided to divide this shield into just two parts. They called their home Europe. They called the other side Asia. The border they chose was a tiny, narrow river in modern-day Georgia called the Phasis. Later on, the Greeks added a third chunk of land. They called it Libya, which we now know as Africa. The border they picked for that was the Nile River. They literally sliced up solid, unbroken land based on one simple rule. If the people on the other side of the river spoke a different language, they lived on a different continent. They called anyone who did not speak Greek a barbarian. Even the famous ancient Greek historian Herodotus realized this was ridiculous. Writing back in the 5th century BC, he openly complained about the map. He said he could not understand why one single undivided Earth should be given 3 different names of women. He questioned who drew these arbitrary boundaries in the first place. The origin of continents was never about rocks or oceans. It was an us versus them survival mechanism designed to make their small world feel superior. They were just trying to organize the chaos of the ancient world. But the Greeks only knew a tiny fraction of the planet. What happens when humans finally cross the oceans and discover the rest of the globe? They do not fix the ancient mistake. They double down on it and force the new world to fit their old map. In the 1400s, European explorers started sailing across the Atlantic. They bumped into an entire half of the planet they did not know existed. This created a massive problem for mapmakers back home. Their holy book of geography said there were only 3 continents. Now there was a fourth, giant piece of land sitting in the middle of the ocean. In 1507, a German mapmaker named Martin Waldseemüller decided this entirely new landmass needed a name. He chose America, honoring a navigator named Amerigo Vespucci. With one pen stroke on a printing press, a mapmaker officially minted a new continent out of thin air. Waldseemüller's map became a massive bestseller. It was essentially a viral piece of content in the 16th century. By the time he realized he made a mistake and tried to take the name off his later maps, it was too late. The printing press had permanently locked the idea into the human mind. It was not defined by tectonic plates. It was defined by a guy in an office who needed a label for his map. As maps became critical for global trade, map makers gained incredible power over how we view the world. Decades later, map makers like Mercator created brilliant new projections to help sailors navigate. But to make those flat maps work, they severely distorted the size of the land. They shrank Africa and stretched out the northern regions to make Europe and North America look massive. The physical shapes of the land masses were warped, but the names stuck forever. We built our entire modern understanding of the planet on these distorted drawings. Which brings us to a massive modern contradiction. You might think we finally figured out a strict scientific definition for continents by now, but depending on where you live, you are being taught a completely different version of reality. Even today, there is absolutely zero scientific consensus on what a continent actually is. It all depends on where you go to school. If you live in the United States, your teachers told you there are exactly 7 continents. But if you take a flight to South America, the textbooks teach that there are only 6. They combine North and South America into one single landmass. Fly over to Russia, and their schools also teach 6, but they combine Europe and Asia into Eurasia. Look at the Olympic Games. Their famous logo has 5 interlocking rings. Why 5? Because they only count 5 participating continents, combining the Americas and completely ignoring Antarctica. Ask a strict geologist, and they might tell you there are only 4, combining Africa, Europe, and Asia into one massive supercontinent called Afro-Eurasia. Some scientists are even arguing right now that we just found an 8th continent completely hidden underwater near New Zealand called Zealandia. There is no universally accepted scientific rule. Continents are exactly like money or countries. They only exist because we all wake up every day and agree to pretend they do. Go outside right now and look at the ground. The dirt beneath your feet is real. The oceans crashing against the shore are real. The physical land masses are real. But the borders we draw between them, the names we give them, that is just a story. A story we invented thousands of years ago just so this massive planet would not feel quite so overwhelming.